Welcome to the Five Phenomenon Podcast. I am your host, Shane Hayes, and coming up on this episode, we talk Annie Baker's 2013 play, The Flick, which won the Pulitzer Prize. It's about three theater workers witnessing the transition from 35 millimeter to digital, amongst other things. I'm joined this week by writer Tyler Coates, who's been a former guest. He's currently writing for The Hollywood Reporter. And new to the show, old friend Eric Gilde. He's a New York-based actor and podcast host. He hosts with his wife Ellen Adair the great baseball movie podcast Take Me Into the Ballgame. But first up, what I watched this week, I finally got around to seeing The Last of Sheila, which whenever Knives Out came out, Ryan Johnson kept talking it up. He hosted a screening of it at the Toronto International Film Festival, and true to his word, man, what a great, charming movie. It's directed by Herbert Ross, which every time I go back to Herbert Ross movies, like I tend to find some really basic charm and craft, and like what that doesn't call attention to itself. He's a great workman with a light touch. But the script was co-written by Stephen Sondheim and Anthony Perkins. And it has this vibe of Cluish vibe to it, with movie stars, though. It's got James Coburn, a young Ian McShane, James Mason, Raquel Welch, Ryan Benjamin, Diane Cannon, and Joan Hackett. I saw it on TCM. Hopefully you guys can catch it while it's still there. Other things, I guess I was on a mystery kick this week. I watched Shadow of the Thin Man, which I'm trying to make my way through the Thin Man movies, and I'm starting to get to the point where they're turning bad, but like it's still I'm there for Nick and Nora, so it's the charm is still there. The most notable funny thing about it is the dog shit is getting way worse and more ridiculous. Like all the gags, like there was a sequence in there where Nick had his son on a merry-go-round and got dizzy, and there's all these odd stylistic tricks to make him seem like he's dizzy, and the dog gets dizzy. And when the dog comes out to show that he's kind of light on his stomach, they shoot the dog in slow motion, and it reminds me of how I was whenever I was taking my first crack at editing tools or film school, even just where like everything looked cool when you slowed it down and you wanted to do it to everything, and then when you showed it didn't look right, but hey, it was an effect. And they use so many slow motion or reverse techniques for the dog that does not look right at all. And the dog shit in the Thin Man, it's fine. It is what it is, the kid stuff. A quick note on the audio. So the main recording went out for about 20 minutes section in the middle of this, and our backup also went out on that too. So there's a 20-minute section in the middle of this where some of the recording is a little on the iffy side. I was so mad at myself too when the technical screw up, just because I really don't know if anyone's listening to these episodes at all, but the last few episodes in particular has been feeling like I've been hanging out with my friends at a bar after a movie, and it's been helping me through the pandemic. It's just it's every sense of isolation. Like I don't like it feels like normal life when I'm doing this, and the only difference, which is what it is we're putting these conversations to posterity and out on the internet. And I felt so mad at myself just because I was so happy to have this conversation with them, and I thought I had screwed it up, but it's there. It's just a little warbly. So hope you enjoy this episode. Tyler, you're in the middle of, I guess, what is ostensibly a 2020 Oscar season right now?
Yeah. It's being extended into February, but yeah.
Okay, but I mean, like, what does that entail? Because, like, is it like whoever can mount an Oscar campaign right now?
I mean, I think that, all of the marketing and stuff is still happening in this, like they're still spending as much money as they would normally, I think. I do
Like the same amount?
Yeah, in a way. Well, I mean, the studios are probably saving money because they don't have that many movies to promote. Like Warner Brothers will still have a couple things. Like I think that they have at least well, they have Judas and the Black Messiah, which hasn't come out yet, and The Little Things, which comes out the end of January. And I think that they are both going to be like they're pushing big for those two, but I don't think that they have any other. I
Is
mean,
there any
Tenet.
progress on the Paul Greengrass movie? It's playing locally here, and I've been tempted to go see it.
It's out. I've seen it. And it was I didn't like it very much, but that's
No one seems
Universal
ecstatic
too.
about it. So
Yeah, that's Universal, so they'll spend a lot of money on it. I mean, I think it's weird because like usually they spend a shit ton of money on, I mean, ads in the Hollywood Reporter. That's one way, and they probably do for Variety too, and Deadline, the digital stuff. I mean, there's so many billboards usually around LA that are just FYC, but I haven't been driving around Hollywood,
because
so I
you're
don't
LA
even know.
based,
Yeah,
and what I last I heard is like 1 in 5 LA people have or have had COVID or had
yeah,
COVID.
basically, you're testing positive. Um, but I mean, it's weird in LA because you're still seeing uh, there's still billboards for like A Quiet Place Part 2 that just were never taken down. Like,
Ooh.
remember when that was supposed to come out? I've completely like I don't know what happened to that.
Yeah.
Dune Thanksgiving 2020 still.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really weird. And I think that like, I mean, honestly, I haven't loved much of the stuff that has come out like that are award season stuff because a lot of it
Only a
is
mother can love some of this stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, a lot of it is like the Sundance stuff that is pretty good, but never really gets much traction or is ever spoken about, after the
There's
year
always
that
like
they come out.
one Sundance movie that's like decent, solid, and it's happy that came like never very sometimes always. Right? That's the
Mhm.
one that I've been like on, but um
Yeah,
I get and without being it's a thing about not being charitable and be like this is genuinely solid, but
yeah.
um Eric, my last trip to New York, I had just started this podcast, and
That's right. Yeah.
I was telling you about it, and you were like, "I'm thinking about starting a podcast of my own." And since then, you and your wife Ellen Adair have come up with like a great, extremely charming podcast, and like,
Oh, thanks, man.
yeah, well, I'm saying that not happily because it's significantly better than this one. So
No, come on.
it's not a competition. No, it's not. But well, it's a great podcast because like I love like the vibe of I mean, I've known you guys for a while, but I get to see you as a married couple talking to each other, and it's
Oh,
just
that's fun.
yeah, it's just charming is the word I keep using over and over.
Yeah. So, Tyler, because I guess you probably have no reason to know this, my wife and I started a podcast last spring. We're both baseball fans, and we were really excited about the season. And then, of course, when everything happened, there was a question as to whether or not there'd be like any baseball at all. And we'd been watching a lot of baseball movies at the time, and we basically bounced around an idea to create a baseball movie focused podcast that has an approach of like rating them a la baseball scouts.
Mm.
And it's been pretty fun, and it's been like fairly durable because whenever I feel like we're capable of having a good episode on a really good baseball movie, but also on really bad ones. I
Mhm.
feel like it kind of the structure of it kind of can accommodate both extremes.
You've deep
And
dived some picks too, like the
we
X-Files episode was a particular one where I was like, that's a great pick you guys got out of that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're definitely trying to mix up the era, the style. So like the last episode that we had was on the bench warmers, which I don't think Ellen is ever gonna forgive me for making her watch. And like the next episode that we're doing is on Baseball Bugs, the 1946 Looney Tunes cartoon.
Okay.
Um,
Wow.
and yeah, we talked for like an hour and 20 minutes about it. And after that, we're doing a Japanese film from the 50s. I Will Buy You, the
Really?
Kobayashi film. Yeah. So we try to we try to go all over the place with it, and it's
I
fun.
mean, I mean, I don't want to like
No, please.
cut your hand, but like, what can you tell us anything about the Japanese baseball film?
That I have a copy of it, and I heard of it by
And
that
you're about to
title,
watch
and
it,
that's
and
about it.
then there will be an episode of it, and then you will. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a couple of week kind of deep dive into the film, and then we'll just let everything out.
Eric, you also, by the way, have the distinction of being the first actor on the podcast because I have made a
Oh
point.
no!
Yeah, well, no, because I mentioned this last week. I have made a point of not having traditional people who always talk about movies on. So I haven't had any producers on, and I
Mm,
haven't had any actors on just because they're the ones that are always featured in the EPKA selling how a movie is made, while
right.
the behind the scenes people making the movies are just kind of like there. So, behind the camera. So welcome to that distinction. I
All
guess
right.
let's go ahead and dive in. So, we're talking about the play, the flick by written by Annie Baker. This episode is going to be titled "Possessive." Annie Baker's The Flick. I first wanted to ask you because I've made a point about not wanting to be auteurist with these movies and not giving a possessive title whenever I put a movie in here. Am I wrong to put a possessive because it seems like her relationship with the director Sam Gold is pretty essential, and it seems like from what I've read behind the scenes, there's a lot of rewriting in rehearsals. Which I mean, this being in movies, I'm not in the pre-production part of it, so I'm unfamiliar with the rewriting, even though I know what happens. But like it seems like it's pretty commonplace in playwriting. So is it wrong to associate a playwright with its play, or in this specific instance, is it wrong to do that?
I don't think so at all. I mean, I think theater, mostly as we know it, tends to be a writer's medium before anything else. So if there is a sole owner of a work, I think it would be the playwright.
Mhm.
You agree with that, Tyler?
Yeah, I would say that. I think because I've seen a production of the flick that wasn't Sam Gold's. So,
Well, we also
yeah.
getting to a point of I I'm a I would say Annie Baker is my favorite working playwright, and I have read I think all of her plays. I've seen one production of it, and I didn't have a good time with it. It was I
This
don't want to
was
say
of the flick.
no. I've only seen Antipodes, and
Uh,
Oh, that is a tough play.
that is a tough play.
That is a play that I imagine it is very easy to come up with a bad production of.
but it's also I keep reading that one of the big plays that brought her up was a Circle Mirror Transformation, and at
Mhm.
one point it was like the second most produced play in America.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful play that uh, only needs 5 actors in a single set
Mhm.
is also a part of that equation.
But the scripts after a certain point are or aren't user proof. Like how does it?
Well, are or aren't sorry, could you say that one more time?
They, I mean, this. It seems like if there's a lot of rewriting in the rehearsals of the first production, like, and then the script that goes out to other productions across the country that are going to do it isn't going to change itself. So, I mean, they're going to be doing the same one. They're not going to be adapting it to.
Right. Well, when you're doing a new play, it's an unpublished and not yet complete work. And I think it's not Annie Baker is not unusual in that. I think most of the time when a new play is getting developed, and that could be over the course not just of the production, of course, but there are workshop productions, there are developmental readings even before that. Annie, I know, has like a group of several other just friends, like a lot of writers do, where they just sit around and read scenes, see what works. And it's such a big developmental process. And by the time you get into the rehearsal room, ideally you want to have something that you like think is production ready, but at the same time, there is, I think, a director and a playwright working together will be watching the rehearsals, and at some point you just think, oh, this doesn't work, or oh, I thought of someone better, or maybe someone else in the room has an idea, and you sort of um, sand down the edges that way, ideally.
I guess because the play seems like she's the big thing with her is the pause, right? So like it seems like the pause in the timing was something that would be hard to reproduce on other productions. And I'm saying this having only seen a non-New York based production that I didn't think was good. So that's where my bias is coming in here.
Well, she's actually gotten. Sorry, Tyler, were you going to say something?
Oh, well, I was going to say that the pause. I think if you read her scripts, I think that what's very interesting about them is that they kind of read. Some plays I think are much more technically written than others. They're much more specific about stage direction and what you're supposed to imagine. Because again, I think people read plays for entertainment, but you're really supposed to
I'm
see
raising my
them.
hand.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. But I think that, from my experience reading her plays, even before I saw The Flick, which is the first thing I saw of hers, um, I was really surprised by how many pauses she puts into like the text itself, and that you're supposed to kind of imagine those pauses happening.
Yeah. She even, I mean, back during Circle Mirror Transformation, she was very like mathematical about it, and I mean wrote it in some ways almost like a piece of music. In that, in the
Wasn't there like a 5-second thing?
well, she has different terms that she gives different values to, and she clarifies that in the like author's note before the play. And I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something like a brief pause is 2 seconds,
Mhm.
a pause is 3 seconds, a long pause is 5 seconds, and it might even be like at least that long. And she has, I don't know, 5 different versions of this, and then she kind of specifies like, if you're not doing this, then you're not doing the play that I wrote.
Mhm.
And I think as she's gone along in her writing, she's loosened that grip a little bit in terms of like that amount of specificity,
I
but
feel like I've
the
seen some
pauses
author
are all
notes
still
where
there.
she some author notes where she says exactly that. Like, I mean, she put out the specificity that you mentioned, and then she's loosened up on it.
And
Yeah.
I think too, like, I think about the author's note in Angels in America, because I've seen a bad college production of that, where, you know, Tony Kushner says, like, basically, he's like, it has to be magical. Like, you can't just stage it and have like the angel just walk on stage. It has to be this big, brilliant thing. I literally have seen, like, I saw a college production in college where the angel like climbs up from a hole in the ground, and I'm like, that certainly
Ooh.
changes the entire text
Yeah.
of this. Um,
No.
but I think also I think that there's a period of time where, like, when a play is first performed and it becomes like zeitgeisty, with the example of The Flick and even Angels in America, like they both won the Pulitzer Prize, and they become, after their original productions, like they sort of like, maybe I'll use pandemic terms, like they become viral and go across the world and start being produced in almost exactly the same fashion as the original production. I feel like there's a certain like amount of time in between when like the revival process starts, as people start doing their own takes on the text, and directing it with more, maybe not experimental, but experimental based on just like what the text actually gives them in terms of like the staging direction.
So, I mean, you guys were both in New York when this came out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was.
You guys both saw it whenever on its first, or was it? It had an initial run and then it went to Broadway.
No, it
It
was.
never went to Broadway.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was in Playwright's Horizons originally, and then they extended it. I forget the name of the theater now. It sort of doesn't exist anymore, but it's the one in the West Village that now Ars Nova has taken over the space.
Oh, the New Ohio or the Ohio? No.
I can't remember. It's this tiny little theater. Um, it's not the Rattlesnake. or I can't remember now.
All right, Tyler, I wanted to ask you, starting off, what was your first experience seeing the play?
So I saw it at Playwrights Horizons on like a 30 under 30 event. So the crowd was very young. I think I had read Circle Mirror Transformation and Body Awareness before, so I sort of knew, her style a little bit, but I don't think I knew it was 3 hours. Which going in, that's like that can make or break a show for someone, I think. But I like immediately responded to it. I really loved it, just like off the bat. And it was interesting, the crowd that I was in, because it was so young, the crowd really, really liked it. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later after it opened that I heard that it was not really a crowd pleaser, that a lot of the playwrights, the older patrons, a lot of the subscribers were not into it because they just found it to be very dull. They literally could not relate to the idea of people cleaning for 3 hours, which says a lot about I think there's like definitely a class commentary there about New York theater audiences.
Yeah, I've heard her come back against this, trying to say that her plays need to like appeal to people over 70 to a certain extent, and she doesn't want to be ageist in theory, but she's also rallied against this, just the typical crowd that you're going to get that's going to support the theaters. There was a letter at this time that someone from the theater had to write.
Yeah, I believe it was the artistic director basically wrote a letter in defense of the play, but also by defending it publicly, he basically gave, some sort of weight to the complaints, I think, from the subscribers. And I think a lot of creatives in the theater community were really turned off by that, by kind of allowing that criticism to be, I don't know, substantial enough that you have to acknowledge it with a formal letter.
Okay. Eric, what was your first experience with the play?
Well, the first thing that I saw of hers was the flick. I had read a number of things before. When Circle Mirror Transformation was at Playwrights, I got many, many messages from friends, just super emotional. It brought them back to moments that we had in grad school, or some similar experience that they had, and it just became this thing of, I hadn't been living in the city for that long, and I either did not have money for a ticket or it was sold out, which that often prevented me from going to any shows, but it certainly kept me from that. I did read it, and I helped cast a production of it, so I got to know the play pretty well.
Okay.
And I also, the same thing happened with the aliens. I was really excited about it. I know all those guys a little bit, and was so like really excited to see it. And it just did not end up happening.
Okay.
So I saw the commercial run of the flick at the Barrow Street Theater.
That's the theater that I was thinking of, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I want to talk a little bit about format, just because I love this play, but probably my favorite plays that I've read of hers is John. And John is framed in this very specific way where it's like that play takes place in Gettysburg at a bed and breakfast, and the stage is like framed by either like a window or just like and the play keeps talking about this idea of like not knowing, and that ghosts might be haunting the bed and breakfast, and the vibe is that the audience is the ghost that's haunting that, or at the very least the ghost is this other character unspoken in the play. And there's this amazing moment from the text, I don't know the actual play itself and the performance, but there's this amazing moment before an act where one character comes out who's got some kind of form of dementia and starts talking to the audience, and it's almost like this character is talking to God, even though he's talking to the audience. The flick, very famously, is framed. The proscenium is the movie screen in the theater. There's a scene late in the play where one character touches the screen, but is there any kind of literal idea of what the screen is supposed to be in the play, or what did you guys feel when you were watching it?
I don't know. What I can say is that watching it in the stage directions for that particular moment, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a very simple stage direction, like Skylar touches the screen or something like that.
Yeah, and it's nice because like when I was looking at pictures to post with this episode, I saw the set for the first time, and it looked like a bunch of movie theaters I have not just been in, but worked in too. It looked familiar.
Well, so it seems like a very simple little observed moment in the text, but at least when I saw it at the Barrow Street Theater, it felt like in Sam Gold's production, it was a much more substantial moment. It was like coming up to like a membrane between worlds or something. Like it felt very highlighted in that sort of a sense. What was
Johnny
your vibe
Darko
of that
touching
moment,
the mirror.
Tyler?
Yeah, I feel, I think what I really liked about her stuff with the flick, and John, I would say, is probably my favorite of her plays. And I think that you can't really talk about either of you can't talk about John without talking about the flick, which we could get into later.
Cool.
But I think that what I really like about her is that she really incorporates the audience purposefully in the play. And so like that, I think the flick does have that moment where, you can argue that's her reaching through, making the proscenium, this weird idea that like when you're sitting in a theater, you're watching a play, there are people in the same room as you performing, but they are, you're supposed to suspend your disbelief. You're supposed to imagine they're performing in its own world, and you're just there, you're not being seen by the characters of the play. And I feel like in her perspective on theater, I feel like is always recognizing that there's an audience watching, and that, there's no phoniness about that. She's not trying to pretend that this isn't a play. This isn't people acting on stage for the entertainment of other people. But also, while she's entertaining people, she's also trying to make them understand that there is a relationship between what's happening on the stage and what's happening, in the seats of the theater itself. That we're all kind of a part of this communal experience. And I think that's what I really dig about her, is that she brings the audience into the experience of the play itself.
Well, I think you're getting to the heart of why I wanted to talk about a play on a film podcast, even if it's about film, just because this last year has been about this bizarre fight over the value of the theater, like put into the front of like going to a movie theater itself. And I've been reading Jonathan Haidt a lot about talking about religiosity and how it just kind of fundamentally goes through the brain. And there's this like overlap I've been thinking a lot lately about churches and going to a theater, both a play or a movie. And there's just the basic idea of like, I mean, I don't want to get into any kind of like spirituality or dogma with you guys, although I think I know where we're all three at, but on this, but like there's a need to come to a room and find a shared narrative together that we can all agree upon. That is fundamental in our brains. And whether it's just like I need to sit in a seat and have some mirror neurons bounce off somebody else and know that I felt an emotional experience to that. And that's one of the unique things about the play, where it's like there's the link between stage acting and film acting. And I mean I'm saying all this, I've never seen, I can't repeat this enough, I've never seen a performance of it, so I don't know, but this is what I assume this is like. And it definitely evokes, when I was rereading the play to come into this, it just really hit. I miss the movie theater. And the other reason I love this play so much is I spend so much of my life working in a movie theater, living what these people live. So
yeah, so Shane, that's what I want to know. I want to know like what hit you as a former theater employee Like, what were give me some truthful moments, if there's anything that maybe.
I have a huge list. The big ones were there's a speech at the end about complaining about working at the theater when all these 20 somethings are coming in when you're in your 30s.
Oh yeah, that's like Matt's whole character, or Sam. That's a big part of Sam, right?
I was doing the math. I was just shy of 30 before I left my last movie theater job. That was a big one. I was a projectionist, and I became a projectionist around. This came up on the Eyes Wide Shut episode around 1999. Before I was just finishing high school, and I remember projecting was a very coveted position. Oh, real quickly, I do want to ask, how many theaters are in at the theater in the play? Is it just one theater?
I think it's a small single screen.
It's just
okay. Yeah, I assumed it was single screen too.
I mean, I think that's a safe assumption. I would also assume that probably there aren't necessarily that many employees for a single screen, but
right.
But I also worked, made most of my living as a projectionist during the transition to digital at one theater. I was in Austin. I was in the theater that was the first theater to completely switch over to digital. So a lot of the concerns of the play I get and witnessed and was a part of. So there's a lot of other tiny things, like when they talk about saving the reels. I remember very distinctly one of my favorite stories is the projectionists back in the late aughts used to cut out every piece of nudity in a movie and made one single reel out of it that they called the nudie reel. And I remember being so angry and upset with them because they took a giant chunk of Eyes Wide Shut out. And I was like, that's ruining revival prints for everyone who's going to have this movie from here on out. But I mean, there's also just like I have a very vivid memory late in the game of projecting of one night. There was our biggest theater was really crowded. And I was getting ready to start a projector and threading. And I remember a little kid that could have been more than 3 just looking up at me. And I don't know if there was a wave or I just idealized it and remember there was a wave, but there was this like connection where I was about to show this kid something magical. Like I was about to show a magic trick to this kid. And I remember feeling like really content and happy with it. There's a scene late in the play where they take down the projector and they build up the digital projector. And being there, that I was there when the switchover happened, like I didn't want to get too technical with certain things that happened in the play, but I can tell you that one went very fast. And one of the things Baker's seems like with the pauses, even despite it all, is still she's playing with time, like that, and something that's very cinematic. Even though she's playing into a real-time space with Playwright. So you guys, was that how it felt when watching the play?
In terms of how like the
did it feel like certain sequences sped up or got montage-like even maybe?
I don't think so personally. I think that's interesting about the about dismantling the projector taking longer. I mean, I guess I would assume that it does. That scene sort of does function on its own a little bit differently, but so much of the pauses are really about behavior, right? They're about what's going on between this person and that person, and whether that is an awkward moment, somebody trying to say something but being unable to, whatever they happen to be taking in, whatever is passing between those characters, I guess isn't as needed in that, since they're both just doing the action of taking apart the thing. So maybe that's why there's a little more license in it.
Okay. Tyler, do you have anything?
I don't remember that. I do remember that there was, part of the like a recurring element in the play.
I have been so close to calling it a movie this entire time. So close.
Is that like the projector like beams the light onto the audience. I remember that also being like a very silly complaint that some of the older audience members had,
Really?
like they didn't want the bright light shined in their face. But I do remember there was like a truly different um, sense to the light projecting from the digital projector than it was the old fashioned one. And like that, like obviously you watch them break it down, but like that is another clue that's supposed to give you this idea that like digital is inherently different than analog. um and I felt like it was a very subtle change, but something that still we're supposed to like leave the audience understanding like why this is so important to some people.
Did the
uh,
light get like warmer or colder from warmer, get more blue or something?
I feel like, yeah, more blue, more cold, maybe less, like more static in a way instead of like kind of flickering. I mean, again, it's been
Yeah,
so long since
that's
I've
a
seen it, but I
No,
feel
I
like
have a
that,
similar memory. Yeah.
yeah. And like harsher. I think it was supposed to be like, I mean, I think you were supposed to feel that this was sort of, I don't know if she's necessarily making a judgment call on it. I think that when I interviewed her, I remember her talking about um, appreciating like the physical nature of it, that we're all gathered to watch this thing that is, while it feels ephemeral, it feels like something you're just watching projected on a screen. There is like an actual physical piece of, I don't know, something that like creates that for us. Um, and and you can change it because, as you said, like projectionists can take things out, they can put things back in, where you can't really do that easily with digital. I mean, I guess you still can, but there's a little bit of quality control to
You really can't. The one I remember specifically also after Fight Club came out, you would do it in the trailers, but there's people put an SEX in the trailer, and what they would do
it.
is like there would be a frame that said S, then a few frames later they'd say E, and then a few frames later is X in there, and they put it in the trailer just because that's the easiest way to slide something in. And that happened only one show because it was so blatantly obvious that they
Oh yeah.
had to take it out. Tyler, I don't think I knew you've interviewed Annie Baker.
Yeah, I think right after the play came out, I was working at BlackBook Magazine at the time, and so I interviewed her for the site. Um, so yeah, we had lunch in Park Slope, which is where she lived at the time.
Hmm.
And yeah, we just kind of talked about everything about the play. I mean, I think that it was after the controversy with playwrights, and she kind of was pretty open about that. I mean, she was like, it sucks that I have to, and she was very open about the fact that like she was interacting with people at talkbacks who were like, I don't want to watch people clean for 3 hours. That's just not something that I relate to. Um, and I think,
So
it
weird.
really speaks to, and I think that the flick was the last show that she did with Playwrights Horizons, and I think that definitely had a role in her moving to the Signature Theater, where she ended up getting a residency. And so John and the Antipodes were both produced there. Um, and I
But
think
you
the
don't.
Antipodes was the first one that wasn't directed by Sam Gold.
That's right. Lila Neugebauer directed it.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's interesting. I mean, this gets into like, I guess the nonprofit theater industry. But if you look at where, like, geographically where the Signature Theater is based on like the proximity to Broadway and where all the theaters in the Broadway theaters are, it's pretty far west on 42nd Street, farther west than Playwrights. It
Mhm.
feels like you're going to the end of the earth when you're going to that theater. And I always found that very interesting because I feel like Playwrights is sort of, as an institution, is still like one of the cooler, hipper nonprofits. I think if you're comparing it to like Manhattan Theater Club, which is pretty
Oh,
stodgy.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and like they're gonna do a lot of like they're sort of like Steppenwolf in that a lot of what they do, the Manhattan Theater Clubs of the world are gonna do a lot of like
Rich,
five dysfunctional family plays. All set in one room, you
rich
know.
white people in crisis.
Yeah, like Richard Greenberg plays. And which are great. I like Richard Greenberg, but Annie Baker, I felt like, was representative of a new crowd of, you know, Gen X cusp millennial playwrights who were doing something that were playing with the format of theater in a way that was really exciting. And I think that, you know, it was really baffling to me hearing how many people didn't like the flick because I loved it so much, and also the crowd that I was with for the 30, like under 35 crowd, were also like really into it.
Oh my,
Um,
I was riveted by it.
yeah.
I don't understand when people talk about how nothing happens or how it's boring. Like, it is so completely full of activity and little nuanced things going on between everybody all the time.
Hmm.
It's not like I left wanting to go to it again.
Right.
Okay. Um. So wait, Tyler, you left that interview thinking that she wasn't making a value judgment on the analog versus digital switch,
No,
because
I mean,
when I
in a way,
read of hers, it seems like she was.
I think that she, I think that she, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting a little bit of myself as someone who, as a writer, I feel like people have often thought that I was issuing value judgments where I was just trying to like sort of
Okay.
describe
Okay.
describe a controversy or describe why people feel the way they feel in response to something. Um, I mean, I do think that I know that she loves movies, and there's an element to that. I think that it was probably I think the flick was probably the first time that I started to, like, even be aware of this discussion about, you know, moving from analog to digital and what that means. Because for me, I just don't have the eye or the understanding to, like, tell when something's been shot on film is being projected on film.
One point I always remember feeling as someone had to work it physically was that one thing we always used to dread as projectionists was scratching a print. And
Mm,
you scratch a print, it's scratched forever. And when you had
right.
digital, it was never going to get scratched. And there was also a vibe I had being involved, starting to get involved with movies. I knew how the switch in the aughts had been from chemically color timing movies to digitally color timing it, and it
Mm,
gave more specific control to directors of photography. And so even when it was still prints, they were printing them out digitally onto physical print. So it was still digital. It was still digital intermediates being printed onto these physical things. So it still looked digital. And in digital, what usually happens is when you get to very excessively high whites or excessively dark blacks on a screen, and the contrast thing, they start to blend together and not differentiate. So a movie like The Godfather doesn't really do really well digitally, but if you go
gotcha.
to a print, you see all that darkness in there. You're going to see many more dimensions in the darkness there. But by that point, it was just becoming a economic point. Like it was just cheaper. Like a print costs like $1,500, and when you sent out a digital movie, it was just a hard drive, and you could make as many prints in the theater as you wanted out of that hard drive, so you
Right.
could send it over and over and over.
Just a quick thought about Annie Baker and this particular digital versus analog question. I bet she probably has some opinion. It might not be a strong one, but I bet she does. I think it is very intentional that the play, I think the play tries to be on everybody's side.
Mm,
And so to be
That
on
makes sense.
everybody's side, I don't think you can have it be this play firmly believes this. Like, I think that there is a sort of like romantic quality to this old film projecting theater. Um, and so I guess it probably skews a little bit that way. But like, I think that the character of Sam is someone who also really likes movies, and it isn't as big of a deal.
He literally says at one point, "I don't care. I
Yeah.
can't
mhm,
tell the difference."
And I don't know, there are moments where I feel like we're we're kind of on Avery's side as far as his defense of it, but the play also I think personally does plenty of things also to convey that like he's a kid and he's still figuring stuff out. That whole argument that he has that the last great American film was Pulp Fiction, I think like makes my ears ring with a certain type of like very smart, very enthusiastic, very young.
Very
Mhm.
dogmatic, very,
Very
very
biopic.
absolutist.
I
Yeah.
worked on a short film last summer with a number of people that were all pretty young. This was kind of like a short film from people who pretty recently graduated film school. And I was talking with the DP and was like, so, hey man, like, let's talk movies. What are some of your favorite films? And he goes, well, Citizen Kane. And, like to me, the Pulp Fiction moment is like a little bit like that. And once you start pulling at the thread a little bit of like, so what are some of your favorite things about Citizen Kane? You're like, oh, well, I mean, it changed everything and just sort of,
People like it. People
and
hold it in high esteem.
it's the answer that they think they should have,
Yeah.
or it is an answer that sort of betrays, um, I don't know, their depth of knowledge within the thing that they're talking about.
Which, to be fair, is all they're going to have at a young age, as
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we're on the side of the film and the romantic qualities of that, but like we also have Annie Baker like inserting that into Avery so that we're not fully on his side either, I think.
Does it fulfill the purpose of like a passing of a season or the passing of a time that you would feel in a story like this, whereas just an age this is about an age moving from one era to another?
Well, I think something that I think about a lot lately is that, um, and I'm gonna literally quote The Sopranos. Not that I even like The Sopranos that much. I have not watched all of it, but I started watching it last year, and I remember from the pilot.
I'm so proud of you, Tyler.
Yeah, there. As Tony Soprano says, like, I feel like I'm at the end of something, and
Okay.
Dr. Melfi is like, literally everyone feels that way. Like, there's that is, like, a sort of universal truth that, like, especially for creative people, they feel like the best has already happened, there's nothing new for them to do, and also, you know
There's actually a psychological phenomenon for it. It's called the end of
Yeah,
history.
yeah, I mean, I think, like, it's easy to think about, like, "Oh god, like, if I were just 5 years older, my career would look so different." Or if I were 5 years younger, I would have so many different, like, opportunities because I would have learned something different, like, in my, like, I don't know, my learning stage where it was easier to pick up on new things. And I think that plays that role a little bit is that, Avery is having this, like, kind of existential crisis that has truly nothing to do with film, but that's what he's placing it onto. That's, like, the easiest way for him to contextualize it, for him to make it feel like it's an actual real object, maybe, that this, like,
Mm.
physical thing that he loves that is representative of something he loves so much is dying, and it's gonna change what he loves so much forever, and he'll never be able to experience it again. I think that's a very extreme, like, terrified person's perspective of this, because again, at the end of the day, it is movies, and movies will always be around in some format, and there's probably gonna be a way that you can see a film projected on screen again,
I love
more
your
more
optimism,
often
Tyler. I
than
love
not,
it.
yeah. But, yeah, I mean, yes, this is me being, almost uncharacteristically optimist, but,
No, and I 100% agree
yeah,
with it, and I'm being facetious and sarcastic, but
yeah, but
it's totally, of course, it's
that's
gonna.
sort of what I really responded to from the play. It is truly about 2 young people and 1 sort of older person who's not that old really in the grand scheme of things.
He's
Really
35 in the
Yeah,
play.
I know, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
I think when I first saw it, I was 29 and now I'm 37, so, uh, uh,
One of my favorite parts of the play is when Avery asks Sam, "What do you wanna be when you grow up?" And
mhm,
Avery and Sam says, "That's the most depressing question I've ever heard in my life."
yeah,
Something like that.
right. And, yeah, I think that that's just like a natural thing that people go through, is this feeling that, like, everything around them that they know and love is over, and they will never experience that joy again. And in reality, it's like, you will, it's just gonna be different, and that's fine.
And if you're going through other stuff and you're projecting that onto that thing, then the disappearance of that thing means like you don't have that shield anymore. Like you have to either find a new thing or sit in whatever it is that you're projecting onto this other
Actually,
activity or something.
be with yourself. Be quiet with yourself.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
literally this conversation and hearing people, like, describing projection as, like, the act of putting your feelings onto something else while we're talking about a show that takes
Wow.
place in the
Yeah,
theater, that never occurred to me.
that's good.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The reason I brought up her opinion on this was because I had read that one of the areas one of the places she first thought of the play was seeing a DCP of a digital version of Fanny and Alexander,
mm,
the Bergman movie, and I am a big fan of. After I started getting into her writing, like she seems to have a really interesting film. Like she's, as you mentioned, Tyler, she is a film fan, and she has a criterion list that is really fascinating. The big movie I got from this was the Chantal Akerman movie, Jean Delmont. Like I had never seen that, and when I saw that, that seemed to be very. Oh, I get what she's. If she made a movie, I get what she's trying to do. I've also read that she was a big Francophile, French New Wave fan as a teenager, and there's a lot of overlap there. But I know specifically with like Fanny and Alexander, I always feel bad because I first saw Fanny and Alexander really, really late in the game. I saw a print of it. I made back when digital was around. I saw a print of it back when I was still in Austin. Richard Linklater used to have these 80s festivals where he called them Jewels in the Wasteland, and he would do a Q&A afterward where they show an actual print. And I got to see Fanny Alexander. And Fanny Alexander is a favorite of a lot of filmmakers I admire. And I can't get into and Alexander for the life of me. And it strikes me as like a lot of Bergman, where it's like, I mean, I like a lot of the big things in the 50s that seem to get to people, but his work always seems to me very cold and judgy and masculine and unforgiving or ungenerous towards his characters. Have either of you guys seen this list? Have you or any of the movies on there?
I really haven't. The only one that I have any familiarity with is Vanya on 42nd Street, and even that, it's been a while. So I
Didn't she do a adaptation, a Chekhov adaptation?
yeah,
Me?
she did that for Vanya.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That was what that was in such a tiny space. Was
I
that?
think that was the Soho Theater?
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that was another very high profile thing.
Mhm.
A bunch of these movies came up. I think it's Act One, Scene Six. Like some of these come up when there's a description of a dream, and they talk about trying like being surrounded by favorite films and trying to scan them.
It's
There's
Avery's dream about
yeah,
like getting into
there's
heaven, right? Or
yeah,
something.
yeah, and there's a mention of Barry Lyndon, which isn't on the list, but then he gets stuck having to watch Honeymoon in Vegas, or Honeymoon in Vegas is the only movie he has access to. I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful moment, and I feel like it's a moment of him kind of contending with this person that he is trying to be or trying to present himself as, this very like wonky film buff guy. And in that moment, he's disgusted at the fact that the movie that like represents him that will let him move on is Honeymoon in Vegas, which he hates. But then he catches himself and is like, but if Honeymoon in Vegas is the thing that like gets me to heaven, like that's okay, right? I mean, you got into heaven. And I feel like that's a moment of him, like, I don't know, doing a little evaluation of himself in a very, dreamy kind of way.
I've been thinking a lot lately that, especially in terms of snobbery, and this year making me rethink everything. There's like, I can't be snobbish about movies anymore because everyone likes movies. They just don't, we don't always like the same movies, and the same criteria we have of what makes a good movie doesn't always apply to every single person, too.
And there has never been a time where it has been more okay for it for you to not like a movie. There is
Mhm.
so much stuff out there
Yeah.
that is so easy to get your hands on. Like people, I mean, this is not to say that people should just, stick in their own alleys or whatever. Like it's good to watch new and different things and figure out what you like and what you don't like. But like I think whatever snobbishness that I have had in those kinds of tastes has also like very much gone out the window because like I feel like there's a lot of good versions of whatever your proclivities are.
Mhm.
I've been feeling good because I feel like I have a head start just because I professionally have to worry about what people like. And then I've been one of the most things as I've gotten to editing, I found how humbling it is. It's like you never know. And
Mm.
what you think is going to blow people away doesn't. What people like, they can't explain it. Sometimes no one can explain why they like what they like, but it's almost an objective fact. If you're in a room when a movie works or when a movie doesn't work, the air, the molecules move differently and everyone can feel it. And if someone's seen that movie before and is waiting to like anticipate it or feel it, they can feel it. They can totally feel it. Um so the other reason I brought up this list is there's a lot of French New Wave stuff with Georges Delerue on there, and a lot of the composer who did a lot of the music for Truffaut, and he did some stuff for Godard. There's two pieces in the play from Delarue. There's like I think they're both from Jules and Jim, and that
Mm.
same year that this first debuted, Francis Ha came out, and Francis Ha very famously has a ton of reutilized Georges Delarue on there. I didn't necessarily want to get too gossipy on the Bombach connection here, but do you guys see any overlap on this? I mean, or is it too early and too premature for that?
Well, I mean, I know the Bomback connection from the gossipy standpoint, I guess. I mean, she did write I think that um,
She also wrote an essay on Criterion
she
on
wrote
Francis Ha.
yeah, she wrote the Francis Ha essay. And I think that I don't know how like the connections happened, but I do know that she was sort of shadowing him on While We're Young, which is
She
like
has a cameo in it,
she
right?
has a cameo in it. And that's sort of the first I would say that's his first movie of his like sort of recent features that he like really started tapping into that kind of like off-Broadway acting scene that she was sort of related to, like,
Because While We're
Matthew
Young shot
McConaughey.
before Francis Ha, didn't it? Because While We're Young was in the edit for a long time, I
Oh,
think.
was it?
I
I'm not
think.
that might be true, yeah, but I feel like that was when he started casting a lot of people from, I feel like, her cohort, um,
Okay.
like Matthew Myers in a couple of his movies now.
Is he the
Obviously
editor in While We're Young? I think it is.
yes, I think that's right, and then he's part of the theater troupe in Marriage
In
Story,
Marriage
with a
Story,
lot
yeah.
of people,
Right. Okay.
of that ilk. Um, but I think that I mean, I watched because there were no good movies that came out last year. I watched a lot of old stuff on Criterion that I'd never seen before, and so I was going through like a Eric Romer week.
Really,
I
that
was
was going to come up.
yeah, and I was like, oh, this is like there's it made me appreciate. I mean, I like Noah Baumbach a lot. I think he's very funny. There are very few of his movies that I just like truly don't like. But he reminds me a lot of Eric Romer in terms of his
Yeah.
personality, his humor, like, just I don't know, and I think it's almost kind of making fun of Eric Romer in a little bit because I think that Baumbach kind of knows when a male character is being ridiculous, and he doesn't
Okay.
do
Okay.
it in
Yeah,
a
I can
way
see. I can
that's
see.
like he's the hero, and, like, the women who are fucking him over are, like, awful, which is sort of what I get from, like, Love in the Afternoon in a little bit of a way.
Have you seen? She's mentioned a few times the Green Ray. Have you seen that?
I watched that twice last year. I loved the
It's
Green Ray.
I saw it way like it's like I think it's the only 80s movies Romare movie I've seen, but like I saw it, it was called by its North American title Summer, which
Mm.
I thought he later made a series of 4 movies in the 90s, but I thought this was a part of it. But I remember it was when I was in the middle of Austin and like really big into Linklater, and Linklater was one of the reasons I moved to Austin. And I just remember this. Well, first off, Summer has, or the Green Ray has this amazingly touching ending that was kind of reused in Before Midnight, but like it's just a beautiful sequence that ends the movie. But I remember that feeling from Linklater, from Romare, from Baumbach, and what I think if she ends up making some movies, what I think is going to come from her too, this feeling that putting a camera on a person from a selected vantage, to be fair, it can be close, it can be far away, but putting a camera on a person and listening to them talk and maybe explain their soul can be very cinematic. You know, you have people like Hitchcock or Brian De Palma that will push this idea that talking is inherently uncinematic because what it does is explain the story or it verbalizes what you're seeing. That doesn't necessarily have to be true. What a person says and doesn't say can be inherently cinematic. And I feel like if she starts making movies on her own, which she's has some promises of, that's what might end up being when she does it.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, it's funny you talk about not talking or talking being cinematic or not talking. I just interviewed Eliza Hittman for Never, Rarely, Sometimes,
Nice.
Always, and she said that a lot of what she wanted to put in there was just the young women not speaking to each other, to sort of to highlight the communication that they have inherently as people who know each other, and like it's sort of the audience job to pick up on that and figure out um, who they are to one another and how they're communicating. And that's sort of what I like about a lot of movies. Is I like movies that leave those gaps open, that are a little ambiguous, because it makes me just start thinking about them more. And I find Annie Baker to be one of those writers who doesn't, you have to sort of peel back the layers to figure out what to make of what she's trying to say, especially after the flick. I think the two plays after the flick, she does that pretty aggressively. I think the Antipodes is definitely the most experimental and the hardest to figure out. Um,
I should mention, by the way, after I saw that production of the Antipodes, I reread it and liked it just as much. What more? Because I was worried that I was like, maybe I just only like these if I read them, but don't see them performed.
right. Interesting. I don't know if I've read that one. I definitely saw it. Um,
Same. I
and
saw it, but I haven't yet gotten hold of a copy of it.
right. I didn't love it. It's definitely my least favorite of the ones I've seen, but I
Okay.
still appreciate, you know, what she's trying to do. And it's interesting to figure out what she's trying to do with that, because I don't think it's very obvious.
There is definitely a feeling that the setup and the beginning of the execution works, and from what I remember, maybe it doesn't make the landing all the way, or all the things she's pointing out doesn't get you all the way. But I mean, Eric, as an actor, have you ever basically? There was a technique I've heard, or like once you've learned the text, once you know the subtext of something, it's this thing of like acting the subtext without acting the text. Where like, have you ever acted a scene where you guys just try to improvise it based on what you know the scene is supposed to be without trying to say anything or something like that?
Yeah,
Even as like an
mm,
exercise,
there
or
are various exercises that some directors, some actors, some companies like to incorporate into their rehearsals. Sometimes you get something out of it, sometimes you don't. It kind of depends. I feel like it might be a little less common in something like a new play, where like figuring out what the right words are is actually like really important. I don't know if you've ever watched Slings and Arrows, the fantastic uh,
I've heard of it, but
Canadian show. Oh, it's wonderful, and it's actually all available on YouTube through like a grant through the Canadian government or something like that. And it takes place at a Shakespearean theater festival, and had huge, like with a nod to the Stratford Festival, huge ensemble of characters. And one of the great scenes in, I believe, the second season is there's a new play festival, and a playwright is doing a reading of his newest work, and he's very frustrated with his work. So he tries to get the actors to come up. He's like, say what I'm saying, but like in your words, and tries to get like better lines out of it, basically. And
Oh man.
I feel like what the joke there is sort of like pointing at is
Write this for me.
and going back to the question of like ownership and authorship, because I think there have been cases, probably most famously with like a chorus line, where you get a bunch of people and build a show together, and then weirdly only this person and this person are getting credit for it.
I mean, that's a big reason I asked, just because I've been witness to like the collaboration is it seems like people. I mean, I love the idea that on stage writer is more king. It's even more so than say like TV, but like
I think that's true in America. I think that is definitely true. I think like in certain like European and like Russian traditions, the director is a little bit more of like a presence in the room.
hmm,
But yeah, I mean, I think it always comes back to the text, unless you're
it
doing like
does.
improv and then it's just the performer.
Right. I would say the only director I can think of that has had that success in America is Ivo Vanov, who like just truly, to me, he sucks all the attention away from everyone else, including the playwrights, because he's usually just writing his own version of those plays.
Sure.
What plays has he done? I'm unfamiliar.
So he does a lot of revivals. He does a lot of adaptations of films. He did a Scenes from a Marriage play,
Really?
which I did not see. I think the only thing I've seen of his, he did The Crucible, and it was very long. I feel like it cut a lot of The Crucible's text out.
It was,
It does a lot of like, I mean, there was like a wolf on stage at one point. At some point, the girls actually fly as if they're really witches.
when I saw that production, there was a like very intense looking guy sitting right next to me, and in that moment he leaned over to me and went, I don't think that's a real wolf. And like went back to his seat, and then a solid 10 seconds passed by, and then he leans in again and goes, it's some kind of dog. Which it's
Yeah.
sad. One of the great memories that I have from that production. But yeah, that was a production that ended with the young girls flying around like witches, aka undermining the point of the entire
Yes.
play.
But I mean, he did a network on Broadway with Bryan Cranston, where he like actually filmed live, like there was a camera crew like live outside on the street being projected. Like he does a lot of projections, and I do think it's it's a very European style of
Okay.
theatrical experience, which is, I think, I don't know, more AV Club to me than theater.
Sometimes, because didn't he also direct that production of View from the Bridge that had
Yeah.
Mark Strong in it? That was like pared down, very simple. It just got straight to the story, and it was really, really beautiful. And then there are things that he does where I'm like, oh, this feels kind of like the Worcester Group, but like
Mhm.
maybe in Dutch and with a bigger budget.
Right. Yeah, right before the pandemic, he had a West Side Story revival, and he infamously cut "I Feel Pretty" from the text.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, it's also not cinematically
Get
like that's
you,
going to have a revival anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it was weird that we were supposed to get 2 West Side Stories in the same year, and then neither of them really happened. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, his style is very, I don't know, feels very masculine to me in a way that's a turn off.
Mhm.
Annie Baker doesn't have much on her IMDb, but like I've read an interview where she mentioned that she's written in Hollywood for a bunch, mainly for health insurance. I don't know how much has been produced beyond her episode of I Love Dick, which I want to talk about in a second. But she mentioned a pilot that she'd written that was about life on a commune in Bolinas, California, that never got made.
Wow, I didn't think about that.
And she was asked a bunch to like adapt her plays into movies, and she gave this really cool quote I love. She said, "Well, if you wanted to do it one long shot with no close-ups," and they were like, "You can't have a movie that's one long shot." But now that we're talking about it, I actually am interested in making a film that's one long shot for 2 hours with no close-ups or change in location. And especially if we're talking about Chantal Akerman, like I totally agree with her. I totally want to see that movie.
I think it could work if she writes it as a screenplay and not as a play. I mean,
Well, she makes it work. I mean,
yeah,
like
yeah.
you have to have proper choice and like make it work. But
Yeah. It's interesting. You know, there's a lot of play adaptations in contention for the Oscar season right now. That I think
I don't know Tyler. I've got on my top 10 list like the last 3 episodes, but 2 of my top 4 are Hamilton and What the Constitution Means to Me.
interesting.
This year.
Yeah, I'm not even considering those. I mean, I'm talking about like
You're like talking about
Ma Rainey. There's One Night in Miami. I just put Malcolm and Marie, which is an original screenplay, but it's just a two-hander. 2 people fighting for an hour and a half in a nice house. And of all of them, I think Malcolm and Marie works the best because it was written and directed by someone who works on film. And One Night in Miami is sort of different. It feels like an amalgamation. Ma Rainey, directed by George C. Wolfe, who's a great theater director, probably not a great movie director.
Mm-hmm.
Boys in the Band, I appreciated it for what it was, but William Friedkin's is much better than Joe Mantello's is going to be because he knows how to make a movie.
Yeah.
And so I think, Jean Delman is a really great film, and it doesn't feel like a play. Like, I don't think that could work as a play.
Because it feels like it's controlling time for you.
It
But
feels
it
like
is
it's
controlling time.
but you also have to be like you have to be so close to that character. That character's so close to the camera for it to work. I just think that like she would get lost in a play, on stage doing the mundane tasks that she does for 3.5 hours. But I think that there's a very clear through line between Annie Baker and John Dillman, and even Fanny and Alexander as a long.
Are you a fan of Fanny and Alexander after all the shitting on it I did earlier?
I did. It's funny. I've only seen the TV version, so I've seen the 5-hour version, not the 3-hour film cut.
I made the commitment on Scenes for a Marriage to do the TV version of that before I saw the theatrical.
Right.
Fanny and Alexander, I saw the theatrical, and I haven't seen the TV version.
I mean, Fanny and Alexander feels like it feels most like his sweetest fairy tale type of film because it's about children growing up.
Yeah, and I think a lot like I know Wes Anderson's a big fan of it just because of like the production design standpoint because like it feels that innocent. It comes from the children.
Right.
So I mentioned this earlier. I do want to talk about her episode of I Love Dick, which she co-wrote with Heidi Schreck from What the Constitution Means to Me. I rewatched it last night and I was struck by this idea of like it's 4 monologues, but at the same time it's intensely cinematic. Like it feels like not Godard level essay cinematic, but like it's very like, the main shot is the character talking to the camera, center lens, looking straight at it, telling they're a monologue. It's 4 monologues, but in the background they're talking about their past, and the past plays out, and then you see some of that come out while they're doing this. And I guess my question to you guys is, if she starts if Annie Baker starts directing movies, what do you think they're going to be like?
The I Love Dick episode is so. It's tough to me to think of that, even though the 2 of them have their names on it. I still think it's a result of a writer's room.
I mean, she's like a consulting producer on the show too, as well.
Right. I mean, she was definitely in the room, and I think the Antipodes was inspired by her experience in that writer's room as not being
okay. That makes
great.
A lot of illumination lights coming on.
And Heidi has had a lot more television experience. She was on
Billions, even.
Yeah, she was writing on Nurse Betty while also like in a show. So there was like she would run from like work to go like act at night. Um, I mean, I can sort of. I mean, I see maybe not as dour as Eliza Hittman's films are because they're so heavy.
But her Hippids movies are so verite. Like I still feel like
Yeah,
she's going to be very composed in her frames and things like that.
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that a little bit of like the performance style in Eliza Hittman would
Okay.
probably transfer over to Annie Baker's hypothetical films. I mean, I sort of hope if she does do a film, it's not something she directs herself because I think
Really?
she does work really well with that collaborative process. I mean, with Sam Gold and Lila, whose last name I don't remember. Eric knows.
No, you
Uh,
don't.
yes. Um,
I went to college with her. That's
okay,
the
there you go. um, but yeah, I mean, I appreciate. I don't know.
Well, okay. What if she collaborated with like? Because she's written a lot for Scott Rudin. If she has a good collaboration, do you think it could work?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I don't
I
know.
mean, yeah, I think it's good. Why not? But, I also don't know that I know what it would be. Part of
Mhm.
me feels like Annie is so smart and so specific about all the choices that she makes that I almost wonder, and I don't know how exactly this would express itself. I feel like she would go into that process realizing what the expectations were, or like, I'm sure there are even plenty of people like talking in her ear about like how this will work and this won't work in your form. And I feel like she would be, you know, I feel like there would be a certain amount of subversion of expectations.
So, I mean, someone at the top of their game, you got to imagine, like, we can't imagine what it's going to be like. That's why it's going to be innovative and interesting to watch. But I mean, do you guys think she's going to do something? Because, like, on her, I can't remember where I heard it from. I think it's her WTF episode she did, but she mentioned that Louis C.K. asked her to co-write Horace and Pete with her.
Yeah,
And
right.
she said, and it sounded like she considered it and said no. But, like, no, I mean, this I Love Dick thing is the only thing of hers that's been produced in film that I've seen.
Right. And from my understanding, it was not a great experience. So I think that
Okay.
maybe
Okay.
that, which I think is what the Antipodes is really about, is
Well, I
about.
mean, does that add to this idea like she may not get something on film eventually and stick with the stage?
I personally don't feel like I need to see an Annie Baker film. I mean, if she wants to do that, I hope it happens. I hope that she can, make money to buy a house somewhere. But
Nice.
aside from like getting a paycheck larger than working off Broadway, um, no, I mean, I think that she's thriving where she is, and also really like paving new roads for herself. I mean, my reading of the plays that we've mostly been talking about is kind of like that the flick was kind of, for me, sort of the height of the thing that she was doing with Circle Mirror Transformation and the aliens after that. And with John, she s- started to kind of like deconstruct what that was. And then with the Antipodes, she deconstructs that. So, like, with all of this very carefully observed behavior and these very like Chekhovian stakes and interactions playing out with John, I feel like it's that, but it's also introducing something more than that, something more than like the this natural world full of well-observed people. We've got these like supernatural elements, these mystical forces that everybody is like kind of acknowledging but kind of not, and it's all very secret and obscure. But while that's happening, we still have these relationships playing out, we still have stories and interactions. And then with Antipodes, I feel like it explodes that, so that we're left with these people in a room that we don't know that much about. We don't know what their deals are. We get some sense of how they're interacting, but like all we're left with are these stories.
And stories about stories and stories about myths.
Yeah, and it like is collapsing in on itself in a way that like I found like very intellectually interesting, but theatrically a little less satisfying. But Ellen, my wife Ellen, loves the Antipodes. I think that's maybe her favorite play of hers.
Well, you're also pointing to the reason why John worked. I mean, I didn't see John again. Repeated. I can't repeat that enough. I don't live in New York, but John worked for me on the page so well because it expanded and the deconstruction built on what you're talking about, and I can see what you're saying with Antipodes. Did you guys have any last thoughts that you guys wanted to mention about Annie Baker?
I would say that like if she does do a movie, I would want it to be. I don't know. I guess I it's hard for me to imagine a movie industry in which Annie Baker gets to make the movie that Annie Baker wants to make. Um, which is why I see her sort of as a writer for hire.
I
Um,
don't want to be too negative or shitty, but I feel like Tyler, you and I had similar thoughts on the most recent Charlie Kaufman movie. And
yeah,
the fact that like he needs a collaborator and it's an
yeah,
intensely great writer who's worked well with other directors.
right.
Like, is
Like
that the
you
scenario that's
can't just
potentially happening?
translate what's going on in his head because he can't do it.
Have either of you read his novel?
I
No.
have it. I have it. I haven't gotten into it yet. It's 700 pages.
I have a friend who like proofread it, and so I got like texts from him like a couple months before it came out, and he was like, "This is a lot to get through."
There's
I'm
the past guest on the episode, Glenn Kenny, had a capsule review it recently where he talked about he thought the book was brilliant and he was just amazed with it. And then he watched I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and it retroactively made him think badly on the book.
Oh wow. Yeah, I am really excited to read it, but I do not envy a person who is serving as like a proofreader or anything of that kind
Right.
for a work by someone such as him.
Possible like spoiler alert. I don't know how this works for future episodes. I'm planning a future episode on Charlie Kaufman's writing in the last 10 years, including his pilots, his last two unproduced pilots. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, and also, yeah, that would be really interesting, especially because, some of his screenplay stuff that sort of didn't end up making it into the film is bananas. That
The
those,
early drafts of being John Malkovich with like the giant
where
what's
he's like
what's the
putting up all
giant
those disguises.
president pumping or yeah.
Yeah, no, there. Yeah, no, that would be fun.
Um, Eric, did you have any last thoughts you wanted to say about Annie Baker's work or the flick in general?
I just think that she is such a delicate writer, and that
Delicate seems like a good word.
even being a reader and like helping for a week with a production of Circle Mirror Transformation, this was years ago. Like even in that kind of less formal for me setting and reading all of these lines for people that are not right for me to play, you can just feel how thoughtfully crafted all of these moments are. And I think
Thoughtful
it's
and
a
crafted, yeah.
incredibly wonderful like gift for actors. And I mean, I definitely, probably before anything else, I look at her work as an actor, even though I've written some and I've directed a little bit too. But I just love the attention paid to these characters, and I love the way that they go, that we get time with them to like really see who they are and how they're interacting. The other anecdote that I will just share is that I am friends a bit with Alex Hanna, who played the Dreaming Man and Skylar in the original production.
Okay.
And we haven't really talked about the play that much, but one thing that I thought was really interesting that I hadn't really thought about is it premiered at Playwrights Horizons, and then it moved to the Barrow Street, which is much smaller. And so they had to recalculate the number of and length of the rows of seats in the set. And so they almost had to restage completely huge parts of the play because of the traffic patterns and I need to be here by this point, and when do we cross each other? When does this moment with the mop happen?
They would measure blocking with seats and stuff like that, seat numbers and things like that.
Right, but I'm sure that they've had all of that very specifically mapped out. But then if you
That's
move
what I'm saying.
to a space that's 2/3 that size, everything changes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking right now of having to clean a smaller theater versus the bigger theater, and being or the dreams I used to have. I don't know if you guys have work dreams, but when I worked at a movie theater, the one work dream I had over and over was cleaning a theater, and the screen kept being equidistant, where it just kept getting further and further away, and I kept having to clean the theater, going on and on and on and on. So,
Shane, what real quick, I wanted to ask you this. Do you have a memory of, is there a weirdest or grossest thing that you found in the theater during your time working in a theater?
there's a few, and I feel bad because I feel like I've mentioned this on past episodes, but the most infamous one was theaters used to double up, and so you'd show an adult movie and a kid movie back and forth, and I remember finding a bottle of liquor after a screening of what was about to show Rugrats in Paris, and then I realized it was Waterboy. That was just someone had brought some liquor into Waterboy.
Mhm.
I feel like there's been diapers and stuff like that in theaters. My favorite story I love telling over and over is it was actually, as this goes with Avery, because it was really early on. When I first worked at the theater, I remember distinctly that I don't know if you guys had this thing with work when you take new jobs where you always feel hated for the first month. And even though I worked at a theater forever,
It's longer than that for me, but yes.
yeah, John Stewart always described it as the "where's the salt" phenomenon, for working in a restaurant. What I did was I made comic strips for everyone after 2 weeks, where I just made fun of our local franchise, and that wound me up. But I want to say it was during this 2 weeks. I think I've told this story on here before. This little girl, this mom and this little girl were trying to at concession, and the mom was ordering, and the little girl kept grabbing her crotch and trying to get her mom's attention, and the mom ignored her and kind of shooed her away and kept ordering, and finally the little girl just gave up and made an audible noise "oh," and a puddle of urine then just appeared underneath her in front of concession.
Oh,
And that's the thing, that is nowhere in the top 100,000 most gross movie theater stories. So
yeah.
yeah. Eric, thank you for asking me that.
Yeah, no, hey, very curious. I mean, you're the
10.
you're
I don't know how many years.
certain-
I gave up piling up.
world.
I was a lifer for a long time. It felt like.
Did you do dinner money? Did you have a
What?
scheme?
No, but we had a thing where we traded passes for free food, and I remember when a manager switched over, he found me one day. I remember I had to sneak in the side door with this giant bag of Red Lobster that I had traded for 4 free movie passes to the manager of Red Lobster, and he was watching me, and then he made this giant memo announcement saying no one else had access to the passes, and the last 2 managers were totally yeah, you guys can get good food out of this, you get a steak dinner out of every week or 2 or something like that, and now nope, it's just the manager that gets that shit now.
Wow.
She nailed a lot. She nailed a lot in this play. I'll give her that.
Well, at least you didn't throw a young, emotionally vulnerable coworker under the bus.
Or
I'm trying to think if I did. I don't think I did.
I mean, it sounded like you didn't, but if you did, then
I didn't, but I was also someone that would have said something along the lines of "There's been no American movie that's been great since Road Warrior," and Road Warrior being a really strong American movie. So I probably would have said that at that time. Eric Gilde, Tyler Coates, thank you guys for talking to me about this play that I know nothing about and have never seen. Thank you guys for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.